The Star Wars prequels are about a republic that turned into an empire, about a democratic society that gave in to fascism. This process was gradual, unnoticed by far too many people until it was too late. On paper, the Republic became the Empire 3 days after the end of the Battle of Coruscant in 19 BBY, when the Senate officially approved the change in government. But in reality, the Republic had fallen long before that. In this video, we're going to be examining Palpatine's rise to power and pinpointing when exactly the Empire was born.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Star Wars: The Clone Wars covered the rise of the Empire and the Siege of Mandalore arc, which was perhaps the best arc the show could ever have hoped for, filled with too many amazing scenes to count. Among the most well-known scenes from the finale arc is the battle between Maul and Ahsoka Tano, as well as the conversation between the two characters which preceded it. In that conversation, one particular exchange stands out.
With your help, the Jedi can stop Sidious before it's too late.
Too late? For what? The Republic to fall? It already has, and you just can't see it. There is no justice, no law, no order, except for the one that will replace it.
A lot of people have called Maul's comments here foresightful, taking them to mean it was inevitable the Republic would fall. But while Maul was definitely foresightful in this arc, literally, considering his visions of the future, that's not what he was expressing here. These were less visions of the future and more observations about the present. That's because, at that point in time, the Republic had already ceased to exist. It was the Empire in all but name, even before Order 66. In fact, it had been that way for quite some time. Let's go back to the beginning. In 32 BBY, the Sith infiltrated the highest echelons of Republic government when the Battle of Naboo propelled Darth Sidious, in his guise as Senator Palpatine, to Supreme Chancellery. Sidious quickly filled the Chancellor's office with his allies, including many who knew who he really was and were on board with his plans. In a matter of days, the Sith had de facto control of the whole galaxy, albeit in secret. Once in power, Sidious began preparing for the endgame of the Sith Grand Plan, planning for the end of the Republic. With that said, the Republic had already been crumbling for centuries before Sidious came to power. Technically speaking, the rise of the Empire era covers the entire Golden Age of the Republic, and for good reason. Throughout the Golden Age, even as the Republic thrived on the surface, it was rotting at its core. The machinations of the Sith, who worked in the shadows according to Darth Bane's grand plan, were a large part of this, but they weren't the sole contributors to the Republic's steady decline either. The Ruusan reformations, which reshaped the Republic after the Dark Age, did a lot to make the Republic more efficient, but they ultimately failed to solve many of the problems that had led to the Dark Age in the first place. Core-centric approaches to governing, overwhelming corporate power, and tremendous economic disparities between the core and the rim. Those problems worsened on their own, and the Sith merely exploited them. When the Sith took over the Republic in 32 BBY, those problems were intensifying to the point where some form of conflict was inevitable. Over the course of Palpatine's 2 terms as Supreme Chancellor, he and Count Dooku, his apprentice, made sure the coming war would serve their interests. Dooku courted greedy corporations and disaffected RimWorlds alike, while Palpatine made life much worse for both of them, fueling their resentment of the Republic. In 24 BBY, Dooku and the allies he gathered declared themselves as the Confederacy of Independent Systems and seceded from the Republic, sparking the Separatist Crisis. 2 years later, that crisis would turn into the Clone Wars. It should be noted that, for nearly the entirety of Palpatine's first 8 years, he did nothing to change the structure of the Republic. He radicalized the soon-to-be Separatists by just continuing to do what the Republic had already been doing. That only changed in the final days of his term when the Confederacy declared itself. It was no coincidence that Dooku delivered his fiery Raxus address mere weeks before Palpatine's term was set to expire. The start of the Separatist Crisis allowed Sidious to push the Emergency Powers Act into law, a bill that eliminated term limits for the duration of the Separatist Crisis and gave the Supreme Chancellor a number of other emergency powers. This was the beginning of the birth of the Empire. Over the course of 5 years, between the start of the Separatist Crisis and the declaration of a new order, the Republic slowly became the Empire through hundreds of reforms passed by the Senate, which Palpatine was always sure to approve with great reluctance. 6 acts in particular were instrumental in his transformation. First was the aforementioned Emergency Powers Act, and second was the Military Creation Act of 22 BBY, which formally adopted the Grand Army of the Republic and essentially declared war on the Confederacy. During the war, in 21 BBY, 2 oft-overlooked measures followed. The Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act, which basically created the Imperial Police State, and the Reflex Amendment, which allowed Palpatine to bypass the Senate to direct the war effort, much like the real-world Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Right after the Battle of Coruscant came a pair of amendments to the Security Act, the Supreme Command Amendment and Judicial Amendment, which made Palpatine the undisputed leader of the Republic military, including the Jedi Order. A day later, the Sector Governance Decree was passed as well, assigning military governors to every sector in the Republic, making the Senate all but powerless. With these measures and the smaller ones that built up to them, the Republic was transformed into an empire without Sidious even needing to wipe out the Jedi Order or declare himself Emperor. Maul saw as much, but the vast majority of the galaxy didn't, disturbingly enough. Those who did were branded either as separatists or violent anarchists and quietly assassinated. A disturbing number of people wouldn't even have cared if they became aware of it. So, to return to our original question, when did the Republic become the Empire? We can pick out the exact moment when the Empire supplanted the Republic, and we can also pick out an earlier point when it became inevitable. The Military Creation Act was the point of no return, when it became a matter of when the Republic would imperialize, not if. A little over a year later, with the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act, the transition was made, even if only a few realized it. By remilitarizing the Republic, the Military Creation Act essentially declared war on the Separatists and put one man in charge of directing it. Both of these factors made the rise of the Empire inevitable. Firstly, it established the supporters of a rather broad cause, one that was still largely non-violent, not just as enemies of the state, but as enemies to be met with deadly force, setting the Republic down the path toward a police state. Secondly, it set up Palpatine as a sort of savior figure, the only one who could stop the separatist threat, opening the door to dictatorial emergency powers. The seeds sown with the Military Creation Act blossomed into the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act, which truly turned the Republic into the Empire. The Security Act created a massive police state with virtually no oversight for Palpatine's near-exclusive use. A police state that would not hesitate to throw any and all civil liberties to the wind. With the powers granted by this act, Palpatine's enforcers put loyalist cities under curfews enforced by armed troops, executed millions of warrantless searches, seizures, and arrests, deported entire species for supposed disloyalties, and kidnapped or even murdered anti-war protesters and separatist sympathizers. But the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act was the moment when the Empire was born, not so much because of the content of the act itself, but because the act was virtually unopposed. Only 2 people are known to have spoken out against the act. Former Supreme Chancellor Valorum, who was killed shortly before it passed, and Senator Bail Organa. Everyone else wholeheartedly supported it. A supermajority of the Senate, and disturbingly many loyalist citizens, cheered the passage of the act, even as it stripped them of most of their rights. Even the Jedi Order said and did nothing about it, or about the resulting abuses. That is what killed the Republic. As Padme Amidala observed it, it died with thunderous applause. Only that applause came a full 2 years before she said as much. The Empire was born not because Darth Sidious forced it onto the galaxy, but because the galaxy accepted it when he made the officer. It was born when loyalists across the Republic turned on their fellow beings, allowing them to be brutalized or even killed, all in the hope that it would make them feel secure. They valued their comfort, their desire for things just to make sense again, over everything they supposedly believed in. The Republic was killed not by malicious action, but by failure to act. What's worse, most of the Republic didn't even have good hindsight of this one either. It took decades for most of the galaxy to see the Security Act for what it truly was. The Jedi kept fighting for the Republic all the same, oblivious to the fact that the Republic had ceased to exist. That, in particular, is a tragedy, as the Jedi should have known better. The self-proclaimed defenders of the light and the balance of the Force stood idly by as the civilization they claimed to protect died, and they kept fighting for the monstrosity that replaced it, hyper-focused on saving something that, by the end of the war, hadn't existed for nearly 2 years. When Darth Sidious finally declared himself Emperor of the Galaxy, virtually the entirety of the former Republic supported him. For some, perhaps, it might seem unbelievable that so many people would cheer on a transition from the Republic to the Empire like that. But the fact of the matter is, what they were cheering on was really just a change of image. Everything evil about the Empire, from its oppression of civilian populations, to its endless militarism, to its countless atrocities, began during the final years of the Republic. So that was when the Republic truly fell and became the Empire. But what do you guys think? Have you considered this angle before? Let us know what you think of this kind of Star Wars political video in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, if you are enjoying the music we're using in our recent videos and in this one, please do check out our Relax Jack music channel. The playlist we use the music from is linked in the description below, so you can click it there and check it out. And if you want to join our wider Geetsly's community, make sure you check us out on Discord to chat to myself and other Star Wars fans. And if you want to play games with other Star Wars fans, then do check out our Geetsly's gaming network, where you can join us on Gmod. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.